The name Norm Smith returns to prominence each and every grand final day, with the biggest game's best player awarded annually with the Norm Smith Medal, and rightly so. Smith's contribution to our game, both as a player and coach, has been matched by few, particularly on the greatest stage of all. He played in 4 premierships as a deadly forward for the Demons in the 1930s and 40s, winning the league goal kicking in 1941, before missing out on the Melbourne coaching job by a single vote at the end of 1948. He transferred to Fitzroy as captain coach for 3 seasons between 1949 and 51, before returning to Melbourne as non-playing coach in 1952. Smith presided over the Demons' greatest era, leading the club into 8 grand finals for 6 premierships in 11 years, and shared a remarkable relationship with superstar player Ron Barassi, who lived with Norm and his family throughout his teenage years. Smith's shock sacking midway through 1965 was one of the biggest football stories of the 20th century. He was reinstated after an unparalleled public outcry just a few days later. He departed Melbourne in 1967, only to return to the coaching ranks with South Melbourne in 1969, leading the Swans into the finals in 1970, their first September action in 25 years. When Ron Barassi took the reins at North Melbourne in 1973, Smith accepted a mentoring role behind the scenes. But a sustained period of ill health ultimately claimed the life of this football legend midway through the season. Norm Smith was named as the AFL Coach of the Century in 1996, the same year in which he was inducted as an inaugural member of the AFL Hall of Fame.
How did it come to be that you went to live with Norm and his family when your mum decided she was going to move to Tassie?
There could have been problems in getting back from Tasmania if I was going to become good enough to be invited back. So rather than do any of that sort of stuff, and I was in the football loop as it was with the Melbourne Thirds, and we'd had this good year, and I'd shown a bit of form and was going to get invited up to the seniors, try out for the senior list, so to speak. So it was just better football-wise, and Mum bought a bungalow, and it was put up at the back of the Smith household in Pascoe Vale, and it's a very good idea to live with a coach. Perhaps I mightn't have made it if I hadn't have. No, I'm only joking there, because Norm was actually tougher on me than other players, because he didn't want anyone saying, "Hey, Ron, you're favouring your border, Roger the Lodger," you know. He wasn't like that. In fact, I can remember he went to the stage where even in my first game, I had to get out on the Friday morning to read the newspaper that I was in the side. He could have easily told me 15
around
hours
the kitchen
before.
table.
Exactly, yeah. So, but he wouldn't, because it didn't happen to any other player. And he was quite right, because it's a saying put this way: you can have favourites. That's human nature. In fact, you probably can't stop having favourites as a human nature thing. But you mustn't play favourites, you know. And I couldn't agree more with that, by the way.
So was Norm scrupulously fair? Was that one of the things that
Yes.
was high on his list of morals?
He was a very, very ethical guy, you know, very ethical. So that was definitely one, no doubt.
Norm Smith was the old school boy subject, the most indelible character you've ever met. He would be one of the most indelible people that I've ever met. What came through with him and what communicated with the public was his utter sincerity and his toughness. But he also had a great sense of fairness, and his word was his bond, and he expected others to live up to those high standards.
During those 60s, when I was at the Sun News Pictorial, we were always dead scared of him. He was always Mr. Smith. And that booming voice of his, I can understand now why all those Demon players were really scared when he sort of came into the rooms, because they all stood to attention. No one spoke out of turn. They were wonderful days, though, for the Melbourne Football Club, because they dominated the whole football scene. Every kid had a Ron Barassi number 31 Guernsey on his back, and it was the MCG was the real focus of football, with Melbourne training there all the time, and Barassi used to strut around town as though he owned the joint, and Norm, of course, was the overseer, the guru, and everyone admired him.
We'll come back to Norm's coaching in a moment, but starting with his playing career, he was an exceptional player in his own right, and it's probably just that his coaching career was so phenomenal that in many ways overshadows what a great player he actually was.
Oh, he was a very good player. I mean, his efforts at full forward, as an example. And I think during a couple of the war years, he played in the centre and won, I think he won Herald
Player of the Year, yeah.
Player
he
of
did.
the Year
Yeah.
as a centre man. No, he was very competent in whatever he did. I mean, he's a very good cricketer. He played for the Melbourne first in cricket, so, and I've got no doubt if it had been a different time, like non-war, and he concentrated on cricket, that he could have made at least the state side. He had a tremendous eye. I know him at tennis and golf and table tennis, which he used to thrash me at as a kid, you know. He didn't like that at all, but he had a great eye and a natural sportsman, yeah.
We always knew him as Norm Smith. Trench coat on, hat, gruff voice. What are you doing here, son? And we used to have trouble every Saturday when we had to go and interview him at the MCG or anywhere else, because you had to find him. There were no press conferences in those days where everything's organised. Norm had these little covens that he had all through the MCG, little committee areas, and you had to go and find him, and it took hours sometimes. And then you'd go up to him and say, Mr. Smith, yes, what do you want, son? Could I get a comment from you? What about today's win? And he'd say, well, what do you think about it? I said, well, the scoreboard looked pretty good. Well, you write the story the way you want to write it, son, because I don't want to have much to do with this. And there was one time there when he fell out with the Sunday boys, you know, Jack Dunn, Kevin Hogan, Rex Pullen, and he wouldn't talk to us. And we still had to go down and interview him. And I remember one time I went down and I knocked on the little committee room just off the training room. And he came to the door and he said, Sunday, Sun News Pictorial, yeah, get lost. So I went back and I told him to get lost, and Jack Dunn, who was a terrific old bloke, said, I'll fix Norm Smith up, don't worry about that. So we said, from now on, we quote him, direct, whatever he says. So Jack went down next week and he got hold of Norm and he said, just say you didn't see me. So from that moment on, coach's comment on a Saturday, Norm Smith, just say you didn't see me. Next week, get lost. I'm not talking to you blokes, all this sort of stuff. It took about 3 or 4 weeks until the Melbourne committee said, hey, Norm, this is making us look like dills here. You better change your attitude. And we got back into the system. You know,
as the old expression goes, 1 pat in the head, 2 kicks in the bum. Smithy probably worked on 1 pat in the head, 8 kicks in the bum. No, he just had that uniqueness and that awe about him that just made you listen.
Tell us about the relationship between Norm and Len, because Len, in particular, is considered to be, in many ways, the forefather of the modern game. He was a very innovative thinker and one of the first, if not the first, to really put down his theory on Australian football and how it should be played in print. Here are the points. This is how you go about it.
Yeah, well, you're well briefed, young fella, because that's exactly what Norm Smith would say. He always deferred to his brother as being the football brain in the family. And he listened intently to his brother, and they always discussed tactics and whatnot. He said that Len Smith was the brain of Australian rules football.
Did Norm coach to a reasonably set plan? Was he an innovative coach, or was he, here's my players, I'm going to prepare them well, I'm going to send them out there in their positions and they do what they're told?
No, he was flexible. He was incisive, and he was imaginative, and he made some fantastic moves which others regarded as inspirational.
When you turn up to pre-season training, if you're just walking in the door at Melbourne as a 17-year-old kid and you've heard of his reputation but you've never met him, what can you expect from Norm Smith,
Well, you'd be
the coach?
shivering in your timbers, I would think, because you would have heard beforehand that he's a no-nonsense guy. On match day, on training night, whatever, when the business of football training or playing is about to start, you know, that's what he was on about, and you had to be very serious, and you would have heard. I knew all this beforehand, so because I knew Norm, I knew that he wouldn't put up with any rubbish, any half-hearted attempts. He just wanted a full-blooded effort.
Norm's ideas on football ideas about life and everything else, really had an impact, on myself. He had that wonderful aspect of never forgetting people's names and such. We used to reckon he had the tape recorder up in that brain and such. Norm always said that his brother Len was a better coach than he was. Well, I can't agree with that. Maybe Len might have got more out of lesser people because they were so different. They were so different you wouldn't believe that they were raised by the same parents. Len, I think cajoled people to do things. Norm probably worked on the fear factor. We were all petrified. And I've heard from the Melbourne guys how he used to treat Barassi, and then I found out, the hard way how he treated the guys he called number one at South and whatever. He didn't rip the kids to pieces. He ripped his top players to pieces. But if people came in at half-time and heard what he said to players, they would probably say that those two will never talk again. But he had that happy knack of having it eating out of his hand again that night.
But he was a natural, soft person. I can remember it must have been about 1949 or 50. He's coaching Fitzroy, and Mum and I are over at his place on the Saturday morning before Melbourne, his team that he just left, so it must have been 49, left, was going to play Fitzroy, his team. And he said to me about 10 o'clock, "Come on, Ronnie, we'll go down and see Mum." So we hop into this old vehicle he had and tootle down about 2 mile to his mother's place, and we go and have a cup of tea, and then we come out and off we go, and about 2 minutes later we're back in front of his house. And I'm only 49, so I'm 13. I looked at him and I think, oh, he must have forgotten something. So he sits there, and then we take off again. This happened 3 times, and the third time I looked across, he was crying. He was crying. He was he was going to play against his mates, and so I knew then that he had a soft heart. Yeah.
I can illustrate this best by saying that in the first season, one of the things that I was very lucky. My first captain was a guy called Hassaman. Hassaman was just a great person, terrific mentor, but also a very courageous player who put his body on the line, didn't have a big build or anything like that, and the number of times he got crunched running backwards in the pack was amazing. But what I couldn't believe is how Norm tore strips off him. In a couple of weeks, he in front of the rest of us, he berated Hassa and questioned his courage and everything like that. And I genuinely got upset about it. And I went and sought out Hassa, and I said to him, look, I know I'm only a youngster, but I'm telling you, if Norm does that again, I'm having a go at him. Because there's one thing you don't pull out, and he's got no right to do that. And he grabbed me aside and he said, hey, young fella, don't do that. He said, this is coach, captain, speak. He said, he knows I don't pull out. But what he's doing is he's sending a message to all you other kids in the team that don't you dare pull out, because this is what I do with the skipper. I thought, wow, how good is that? How good is that for man management? Got me and sucked me in. And I just say this again, that sometimes the perception and the ways and means, and so he was a person from outside, might have been tough, and he would have been at times, but he knew his mark. He knew who he could go to, who he could say, and what he needed to do in certain terms to get the best out of people.
Last week on the...
So, Ron, here's Norm Smith at the top of the football tree. He's won, at that point in time, 5 premierships with Melbourne. He's untouchable. He's a larger-than-life figure. He's got this amazing aura about him. He's led the demons out of the wilderness. How did it come to pass that in 1965 the unthinkable happened? Norm Smith was sacked by the Melbourne Football Club.
Well, my theory about it is it started a couple of years before, when Norm, in a radio interview after a match at the MCG, criticised umpire Blue's decisions and called him a cheat. Now, that's a very nasty word, and Norm was quite wrong in using that word, in my opinion. Anyway, umpire Blue, and so would have I if I'd been him, and I reckon so would have Norm if he'd been him, took exception to this and sued him. because it's a very nasty, you know, below the belt word. So Norm's under the situation where he's going to be sued by the umpire. He goes to the club for assistance. Now, if I'd been the club and Norm was an average coach or an average tenure coach, I might have said, well, mate, you're an experienced adult, you're an experienced football person, you're an experienced media person, you said it, you wear it. That's what I might have said. But at this stage, Norm Smith had won 9 premierships as player or coach for his club. I mean, so you don't do those sort of people, you just back to the hilt, even though you perhaps know he's wrong or think he's wrong. So in Melbourne, in saying no, I think we're very, very wrong. And to me, I think it created some tension there, and the feeling wasn't anywhere near as good as it was previously. And I can remember myself seeing this, and I'm starting to get the age where perhaps coaching may be coming on stream, or approaches in that way were coming on. And I thought, well, who the hell would want to coach? I mean, he's the best coach in Australia, getting sort of rounds of the kitchen, so to speak, from his club. Why would you want to be a coach? So, I mean, my opinion changed later, but that's another story. But yeah, it was very, very sad. And luckily for me, I was at the Carlton Footy Club when this aggro stuff started happening with Norman. He got the sack, and I can remember, actually, I thought, well, I'm at Carlton. I shouldn't be in this, but I just couldn't help myself. And I remember going over to the CEO's place, Jimmy Cardwell, they were called secretaries in those days, and giving him the rounds of the kitchen for half an hour. And
so when you heard, you were livid?
I was, yeah. I was wrong in going over because it had nothing to do with me, but anyway, I had to go over and say something because Norm and I were so close, and yeah, well...
It was like sticking up for family.
Yeah, that's yeah, exactly right. I don't think anyone took real exception to it because they understood.
How did the Tony Charlton football show become a part of this entire episode?
Well, as I say, it was circumstantial. He had been engaged by me, along with Dennis Courtin, as Melbourne representatives on the football panel. And because of the kind of person that he was, and despite, you can imagine, with this eruption, everybody was after him to comment and to offer him money if he would comment, but he wouldn't. And I didn't know of that until after the event. He told me that they had approached him. Norm Spencer of Channel 7 was one larger than life at the time, and I would expect him to do that. He was just doing his job. But Smithy wouldn't do that. He said he wouldn't talk until the football show on the Sunday morning. This happened on the Friday night.
Have you got clear recollections of that particular show? Because it must have been one of the most compelling pieces of football television ever.
Apart from misgivings about my own role in it, seemed like a funeral service. He was just absolutely dramatic and dynamic. And he turned to the camera and said, "You men of Melbourne." God, he gave it to them. And it was just an extraordinary experience.
Well, it starts back, I'd say a year or two ago. I think when the committee failed to support me, or give me the support that I wanted in this writ action, it was unacceptable to me that I could work with men who wouldn't back me, men who would expect me to get the utmost from the players and demand from the players the loyalty and support, and at the other end of the line were not prepared to give me their support. That's where it started. I was just stunned to think, and the allegations. One allegation was I told a deliberate lie. Anyone that knows me knows I wouldn't lie. I'd sooner fight than lie. I mean, I don't lie. But they said it, and the thing was, well, fancy them doing a thing like this to me without giving me the right. I was tried, sentenced, convicted, sentenced, without any right to express on my own behalf this allegation. Now, later on in the show, we're going to have the captain and vice captain of Melbourne here, I hope, and they're going to tell you that one of these allegations is a complete and utter fabrication. There's only one way I'd ever go back to Melbourne. If those men offer themselves for election, they've never stood for an election, If they offer themselves for election, if they've got the courage of their convictions, they'll do this, Tony. But I don't think they will. They sit back and they're snug and they don't even approach me. They do it behind my back, everything that's done down there. Why? They're things I don't do. As I said to the President the other night, we got arguing at the committee over something on Wednesday night. I said, you went to a big school, you went to a public school, I went to a state school. I said, but they still spell principle the same way. And it's the principle for which I am fighting. I was brought up that way. Len was brought up that way. And if you haven't got principle, you haven't got anything. And I've got principle, and I'll fight for this principle to the day I die.
What repercussions, Norm, do you expect this whole episode to have within the club?
The repercussions I would like it to have is that every Melbourne Football Club supporter and every Melbourne Cricket Club supporter registers a protest in the strongest terms at the way it's been handled. Get rid of these blokes. That's the only way the club will progress. I have told the President, I have told the Secretary, I spoke to them as friends. I said, look, the club's slipping, the club's slipping. This has been used again. I'm undermining them. I can see something happening that nobody else can see. I spoke to Ronnie this morning. He can see it. He can see it happening. Everyone can see it happening, but the fools who run it.
What do you think you'll do, Norm?
I don't know. It's tough, isn't it? I don't know just what to do.
You're full of fight.
I'll fight if that can do any good.
Norm was reinstated very shortly thereafter, but there's no doubt right at that point of time there was something missing, that the soul was missing within the club, that I only had to be told by other people, not me, because I hadn't been there before. I just knew it as Norm and my relationship with him, and that never wavered, and I certainly got from him. But from then on, people just tell me the edge and the unified culture of the place started to fall apart.
Norm became a very mellow man. When he went to the Swans, and he made the finals down there in 70, and I remember they had to go down to Geelong and win a match down there to stay in the finals. And then I went down with the team. You can't do that these days, can you? Go along with the team. They had a 2-carriage train that left from South Melbourne to go down to Canadian Park. And we were all sitting there, and he was a mellow man by then. He was enjoying life. This is the Norm we would have liked to have seen in the 60s, of course. But coming back on that train after the victory, where the Swans had made the finals, you can't imagine what it was like. And we're all sitting back there enjoying the old can, and Norm was singing and everything like that. Barras would have been shocked. Really, all those Melbourne blokes would have been shocked. But that was Norm of another time, and Bobby Skilton was terrific with him, and he just had a terrific time. It was good that he had that time at South Melbourne when he could relax and enjoy his football instead of sort of being the guru down at Melbourne.
He must have been very proud of you by the time you died in 1973, to have seen this young fella that he first knew as a teenager, and even younger than that, to see you develop to be a superstar player and then a very successful coach in your own right.
I would imagine he would have been. Yeah, I'd be surprised if he wasn't. But as I said before, he had his favourites, but didn't play favourites.
You must have been pretty proud of him too, to have a legend of the game and have him such an important part of your life.
Gee, how lucky was I? I mean, I've been extremely blessed, and people say, well, that's Ron's putting on a bit of an act here about modesty and all that stuff. I've just been blessed to be in the right place at the right time.
How should Norm Smith be remembered? How would you describe him to someone of my age that never had the privilege of meeting him?
You missed out on meeting a mighty person who was a great person, a great player, a great coach.
In football or in life, there are people who have an indelible impression on you, and really have a big impact on how you think, not just about your football, but about your life. And in my own case, Norm Smith was one of those.
He could be tough and everything like that, but he saw you not only as a footballer, he saw you as a human being, as an individual. I love the man.